I've heard this question asked dozens of times. Frodan, I love that Flex is back in TFT, but how do I play around my headliners? Do I buy this headliner? When do I sell it? Or should I be passing it and looking for something better? Well, in the first episode of In Too Deep for Set 10, we dive into the fundamental concepts of what makes a strong headliner to maximize your board strength. Well, by using one simple formula and capitalizing on my high rolls, I cruise to an easy first against some of the top players on the North American server. And here's the formula. Strength of your board equals items times your augment times your headliner. All of your decisions should always start with whether or not these three core variables are improved by any of your decisions. And more importantly, how they synergize with each other. This formula will make it easy to evaluate whether or not the headliner on your board or in your shop worth keeping, selling, or passing for something better. It sounds hard to do, just let the game come to you, but trust me, it's easier than you think. Just watch this game and you'll be the best TFT mathematician in no time. So I'm jumping into a game immediately where I'm introduced with an opportunity to buy a Tahm Kench Chosen. I see that I hit also an Urgot, meaning that I can lean into country, and also solves one of the biggest problems in the early game, which is having a consistent front line. I also drop two components. I get a belt as well as a glove. So now I have the opportunity to make one of three items. I can make a Sunfire Cape, I can make a Steadfast Heart, or I can go for a Guard Breaker. One is offensive, one is defensive, and one is utility / offensive base, but it goes on a frontline item in the form of Sunfire Cape. And in spots like this, the most important thing to think about is how I'm going to play around my augments. This portal is all silver augments, so I know that I have to play around silvers, and so I'm going to be leaning into whatever I can get. Let's pause right here and think about what is the best way to make my Chosen stronger and make my board more holistic. But pumping up is something that benefits only one unit on my board, and that's Urgot. And unless I slam a Guard Breaker on Urgot, which is a viable line, it doesn't feel like a really strong way to benefit me right now because pumping up is something that scales, so it gets a lot better in the late game. And unless I want to specifically lean into that, this is not really a good choice right here. Parting Gifts is a little bit tricky because while I could pass on a really useful item like a Warmogs, for example, to give a bunch of HP as they die, and I have to make sure that Parting Gifts, whoever is holding it, is likely to die first. My Chosen is Tahm Kench. He's not going to die very quickly. In fact, it's likelier that the other units die first before Tahm Kench does to pass the item. The third augment is not particularly good because Tahm Kench doesn't have mana, so Cybernetic Uplink doesn't even benefit my Chosen. So in this spot where I ask what is the best way to benefit my Chosen for early game, the answer is really none of them. I'm probably going to reroll most. Okay, so I reroll all of them and I get Blistering Strikes, Healing Orbs, and Stim Pack. There's two options here that stand out. Healing Orbs is the first augment I'm looking at because it's generically a really good healing augment and also much better in the early game. Early game, you care about things like this flat heal for 200 HP. In the late game, that 200 HP is worth a lot less because you're playing with thousands of HP, but in the early game, healing orbs can be very solid to keep your team alive. On the other hand, Blistering Strikes is really interesting because of my item combination. Remember, I have a belt, a vest, and a glove. Before, I was worried about damage because I have a Chosen Tahm Kench, meaning that I don't have a lot of DPS. I have really good tank. So that means that I have to figure out other ways to get damage in. That means that in this spot, I was probably thinking about slamming things like a Sunfire Cape in order to get more damage onto the board, as well as putting it on Tahm Kench, who is inherently a lot tankier due to that headliner boost of getting bonus HP. Choosing the Blistering Strikes here means that I don't have to choose something like Sunfire Cape and use my items to be a little bit more effective instead. So I choose Blistering Strikes. Now that I chose Blistering Strike, that leaves me with two options. I can go for a Guard Breaker or I can go for a Steadfast Heart. And because I'm playing around my Chosen Tahm Kench, remember to make your Chosen the strongest unit possible. I'm going to go for instead a Steadfast Heart over a Guard Breaker because that's the best way that I think I can capitalize off of this Tahm Kench. And now that gives me the opportunity to play around this belt in a couple different ways. I can go for another secondary item on Tahm Kench, such as Redemption or Warmogs, or I could potentially pick up something like a Gnasher's Tooth or a Guard Breaker and think about offensive items as well. And belts is a more flexible component. If I chose to play for a Guard Breaker and then I have a floating vest, a Chain Vest only has options to build mainly into melee or frontline units. So in that case, I would have to build a Tahm Kench item next, and I want that flexibility. Here we're going to pause on 2-2 and talk a little bit about the decision making. There's two things in my mind here at stage 2-2. One, I know I'm going to reroll. If you're playing Punk, you want to try to roll in the early stages of the game because even though it costs you a gold, if you upgrade your board and win, you get that gold back. So it's important to invest into your streak and to your board strength. The second thing is what units you want to hold that could potentially play around not just your strongest board, but also potentially what you could hit. Because remember, Chosen every 4 shops gives you the opportunity to see a new Chosen. When you're playing Punk, That means you have more opportunities to look at Chosens compared to the average player. Every other player is unlikely to sell their Chosen and roll in stage 2 without Punk or without an augment like Golden Ticket and Prismatic Ticket. So because you're the one that's going to be rerolling, you get more looks at Chosen. Hold units that you think could potentially benefit you in that spot. So here I'm holding on to units like Gnar and Gragas because they tie into my immediate synergies. And if I'm able to get to a strong 2 cost Chosen in the next round, I may be able to play around Moshers or something else nice that can tie in with these synergies. So when you're thinking about holding units from shop to shop, think about what is good now and potentially could bridge into the future. So I improve my board by finding Katarina and I take out Punk, so now I'm not going to get that free reroll. And I already saw my Chosen Corki here, meaning that I'm not going to see it until the end of stage 2. So this is likely what I'm going to commit towards. Stage 2-3 is really, really crucial here, and where we start to really ramp up on the importance of playing a strong early game around your Chosen. So I have my traits activated through Country and Bruiser to make my Chosen stronger, but at the same time, I have the ability to level to 5. If I'm willing to sell my 2 Vise and sell this Evelyn, I can pick up Olaf, and I can double level and play this Gragas and this Olaf, take out something like the Mosher on the Gnar, and play 3 Country and 4 Bruiser, which sounds like a lot of HP and potentially a way to win. But what's important to recognize is that I also feel like I have to sacrifice something in return. If I choose to do all that, I wouldn't have the gold to be able to buy Gragas pair, and that means that I'm sacrificing my future development, not just economically, but also not holding pairs like Gragas, which can also continue to further my board improvement in future rounds. So the way to answer a question like this, do I level to 5 versus do I just hold here and try to make gold or even pre-level, is scout. I have to look around and see what boards are potentially strong enough to contest me for it. So I scout and I see Noster has 4 units, but because he's holding a full bench and it looks like some of those units are really valuable, like a Vi pair and potentially other pairs that he wants to play off of, he's unlikely to level, so I think he can stay at 4. I scout this board, which only has a Chosen Cassante with Sentinels, and I feel like he's lacking a little bit of damage. I scout this board, which looks like it has Olaf 2 plus an Even Shroud and not even a 3rd unit in, so they're inherently going to be lacking damage as well. No one looks like they're going to 5, and I know that I'm going to be playing 5v4 with Country, so I feel okay to rip it here. So I match up against the Chosen Cassante KDA board. I put a belt onto Tahm Kench because it does look a little bit close to me. He does have blistering strikes, which I think I didn't see during that time. And that belt also works really well with the damage reduction. Tahm Kench has 2 effects of damage reduction, his ability, plus the Steadfast Heart item. And so having extra HP is exactly what he's looking for. And I know that it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to get something really strong offensively since I'm playing around Katarina and Urgot, who don't inherently use belt items very well. So I'm probably going to be using this belt item for something on Tahm Kench to combo with. And in this scenario, I'm looking at either the Redemption or the Warmogs to keep my momentum going. I could also think about a bow in this spot as well, but I think the Redemption ends up being the best because it heals that Tahm Kench and also because a lot of my units are 1 and 2 hex range. So think about what ends up synergizing with my board the most here. Redemption will likely keep all my units healthy, as well as continue to feed into that Tahm Kench tankiness. And then the last benefit was that that was 3 gold on a Vex. And so I felt like I need to rebound my economy because I end up pre-leveling instead of saving up to 10 gold. Now that I have Redemption, I'm bunching all my units together. And I end up going for that 4 Bruiser, 3 Country board that I talked about earlier. And I'm going up against a level 4 player, so this should be a win. It's a little scary because this is a Son of 2. So if I can't kill his Tahm Kench fast enough, that Rage Blade is going to outscale me. But I'm so far ahead in terms of the number count because that Hecarim counts as a 6th unit. I'm fighting 6v4. I should be able to overwhelm him. There's no unit here that's really important to hold, so I choose to buy the Nami. I'm probably just going to sell it anyways. And now here comes the really difficult fight of going up against the 4 Punk board, which has multiple upgrades now. Scouting against Kurum's double Rage Blade with the Super Fan. So there's 2 Jinx players, and I have to think about what can close the distance. Because I know that the Jinxes are in the top left, and I'm more of a melee close range comp, I don't want to be far away from that Jinx. I want to be closer so that way I can spend less time walking up. I end up putting the Olaf here on the right side because I anticipate the Jinx to be at the top left, and I want the Gragas to be taking damage instead. But that's the mark of a good challenger player. They end up swapping the last second, and they end up destroying my momentum because I end up getting the opposite of what I wanted. I said I wanted to be close to Jinx. I am getting farther away, and also the wrong unit was targeted. Everything ended up going slightly badly, and I think as a result, I lose this fight. I had to sell this Gnar and instead make 20 gold. This is an interesting spot. I have an opportunity to buy a Twitch Chosen, and you have to evaluate your Chosen based off the quality of the board, but also most importantly of what it takes away. If I buy this Twitch, that that means I have to sell this Tom Kench. If I sell Tom Kench, my front line is going to be Gragas 1, Olaf 1, and maybe another Gragas 1. So all of a sudden, I've destabilized my front line because I've downgraded my quality significantly. I went from 4 Bruiser to 2, and I'll be playing units that can't tank, and I'll be gaining something like Twitch, which I don't even have items for. I have Redemption, and I have Steadfast Heart. How do those items actually work with Twitch as my chosen? They don't. And so I feel like this is a spot where even though it can combo theoretically with my Samira in my backline, I could play 3 country while having executioners, my front line is going to be too weak, and I don't have balance to my composition. Not to mention, I still have things like Blistering Strikes to help add in damage, and so it's not like I'm lacking a lot of damage. I just need a little bit more. I get a really lucky orb, and I find this set, meaning that I can instead play Bruiser and Mosher and replace that Olaf to have that Mosher combination with Urgot. I get really fortunate and hit a set off the orb so I can replace that Olaf. I end up selling things like, my Katarina pair and whatnot because I know that it's not really what's important. Because if I end up investing more into country, that just makes my Dreadseed a little bit tankier, and that's not really what my comp is lacking. My comp is lacking more of that damage sources in the back line, so that way Urgot and Samira feel like they have more help than just having no items. Also, now that I have a glove, it means that I want to be thinking about my backline units that can utilize glove items. So I'll be thinking about Last Whisper, Jewel Gauntlet, maybe even another Guard Breaker if I find a belt. I go up against a level 6 player from Kurum who is trying to fight for streak, so it's not important for me to try level 6 to match up with it because I don't have a win streak to protect. Let's take a look at these 3-2 augments. This is Silver Veil, which gives me attack speed and immune to the first crowd control effect in combat. This is not necessarily a really strong augment for me right now, but later in the game, that first crowd control effect would be useful. I don't think I'm in a spot where this is immediately beneficial, but you could argue that late game I would need something like this, and I'm healthy enough with 93 HP with a good amount of economy to think about the late game. That's one candidate. Team building is interesting because that means that if I take team building, I'm committed to leveling and rolling. But I don't think I want to be doing that. On level 6, you usually roll for 2 costs. The odds for 3s are significantly lower compared to level 7, level 8. And so rolling for 3 costs at 6 specifically is a lot harder than it is later in the game. And if I don't use team building now and say, hey, I picked team building for my 4-1 roll down, that means that I just basically picked an augment that I wish I had at 4-2 instead of 3-2. The last option is Pandora's items, which I don't feel like I want because I already have items committed to my units already, and the only thing that would be rolling on the Pandora's items is my glove. And so I think all of these are okay, but not particularly powerful. I want to see some more options. I reroll options 1 and 3 because I want to have a backup option in case things don't go well and I get a situation where like none of my options are good. So I'm willing to play team building if I need to, but I'm running a little bit out of time. I come across Keepers and Parcel Ascension. Keepers is interesting because I do have Redemption, so I want to naturally keep my units a little bit more clumped, and I'm playing around things like Urgot and other 2 hex range units, so maybe I do want Keeper value. But I'm looking at Parcel Ascension and I said, hey, what is my comp missing? My comp is missing damage. And so Partial Ascension actually works really well with my current game plan. I have bruisers and country, meaning I have a lot of frontline, a lot of ways to drag out the length of the fight. Partial Ascension will give me more of that damage to compensate and potentially make things like that Urgot and that Samira deal a lot more damage and bring balance to my composition. I level and I play a second Gragas and I hold the Olaf pair on the bench. If I win, that means I go to 38. I can sell both these Olafs and have the opportunity to go to 40 gold. But if I lose, I still get to hold into more bruisers, like multiple bruisers pairs, and it's not like I'm on a win streak anyway to protect. As you can see, the Ascension kicks in and all of a sudden my team starts doing a lot more damage. That Hecarim AoE ended up wiping out 2 units. At this point, I'm realizing that my comp is actually really good and I don't have to roll further. All right, so I'm scouting around. I see other people have 3 cost chosen. So some people did choose to roll or use their natural shops in order to get them to a 3 cost chosen. Okay, I'm scouting around. I see 3 cost chosens, 2 cost chosen. Some people have MF2, Yone 2. So a lot of people are a lot stronger. But because I have good balance in my composition, just look how strong I am. A lot of people are hitting things like the chosen of Philios or chosen Yone and Misfortune. I think I can be competitive. On Carousel, I'm thinking about how to finally make offensive items. Yes, I do have augments to make up for my lack of damage, but I really need something to start boosting my damage a lot more. I take a belt because Guardbreaker is still really generic, and I don't know if I want to play something like Jewel Gauntlet and commit to an AP champion when I don't know exactly what the game is going to give me. So belt with Guardbreaker is just bonus damage that works on shielded champions, which is really generic. Anybody could use that. I have a Lux pair, and now I'm thinking about leveling to 7 here, but if so, what would I play? I don't think there's anything particularly powerful. I would probably play another Bruiser, maybe I play another Executioner, but it's just a 1-star unit that doesn't move the needle significantly. So I choose instead instead to just play this Vex over my Twitch as an upgrade. I slam components like the glove on an Executioner because that extra crit converts into a little bit more damage. And then this belt on Tahm Kench, as we talked before, is still good enough to be played to stall. And so because I know I'm not slamming Guard Breaker, I'm just going to commit to putting my items onto a chosen unit that I'm going to be selling. This Tahm Kench is not going to be played at level 7 because, as you can see, it starts to fall off. My stage 3 has been 2 wins, 2 losses, meaning that if that's where I'm struggling now to break even, I'm probably going to need to sell this Tahm Kench to improve. At this point, I'm also thinking about holding bench units that are relevant to my backline immediately. So I have things like Executioner, so this Karthus makes sense. You could argue that Karthus might be better than Vex right now, but Vex has a stun, which is really nice. Having that extra stun means maybe I kick in Ascension a little bit quicker. And Karthus usually needs mana items, otherwise he doesn't really do much. I go up against level 6 board, and it looks like I'm going to be able to win this fight, which is a huge thing because that means that I went 3-2 without rolling, and I was able to still protect a lot of HP while also greeting my econ. But during this PvE round, I highly recommend selling your chosen because I know I'm going to be, well, 1, beating these wolves, but 2, I know that I'm going to be committing to a different chosen anyways, and I'm going to be looking for a 3-cost chosen that I feel like is reliable enough to play around. And so at this point, I'm going to be looking at things shop by shop to figure out how I can improve my board. So I have a set 2, which means that my front line is anchored, and I buy this chosen because look at my items. I have a tier, a rod, and a sword, meaning that I have an opportunity to play around AP if I really want to. So I go for this Shojin onto the Lux, and I'm probably going to commit 3 items to set because my front line is the key to my comp. Remember, as much as I can go for Jewel Gauntlet, I have Ascension and Blistering Strike. Make my front line a little bit more solid. Now, it's not like Ionic Spark gives me a lot of tankiness, but it helps get 3 items onto set to make him more impactful. And I have the opportunity to play around Belt and Glove, which are still more flexible items. So here's my 3rd augment. And the most important thing I'm thinking about is how do I have balance to my composition? I have a utility augment in the form of Blistering Strikes. It means that I have anti-heal and I don't need to build things like Sunfire Cape and Morello or a red buff. I have damage in the form of Ascension, which means that if I find something like defensive that synergizes with my composition, I'll have the holy trinity of TFT on lock, which is offense, defense, and utility. So with that in mind, my eye immediately goes to Unified Resistance, which is hard to resist taking immediately, but I should do my due diligence. Best Friends, it's okay, but it's kind of like a halfway point between offense and defense, and it mainly focuses on units that scale a lot with attack speed and benefits off of armor, which can be good, but it kind of messes with my positioning a little bit, and I feel like Unified is just better. Misconnections is an econ augment that also gives you potentially the opportunity to 2-star a 1 cost or maybe even chase a 3-star reroll. I'm not going for that right now, so I'm going to reroll both of those. My next 2 options are Indomitable Will and Silver Ticket. Indomitable Will is also something worth thinking about. It's utility in the form of anti-crowd control, and that actually could work here. Indomitable Will is also much stronger in the late game when people get their big AoE CC that can really swing fights like a Thresh. So this is a spot where I could theoretically take it. Silver Ticket is not particularly strong though because I'm not really rerolling because I'm committed to playing tempo to try to get to level 8. So it's got to be Unified Resistance in this point. There's no other clear choice. So I got to go with Unified Resistance here. Clearly the correct choice. And I find a way to slightly improve my board by playing things like the Moshers, the EDM, and the Dazzlers. And once more, I'm in a spot where I have to think about whether or not I want to roll. So I scout and I see some strong boards, but in reality, I have really good semblance of balance to my front line and my back line. I have a 2-star frontliner in the form of Set that's 3 cost. And I have a 2-star chosen Lux with 2 items with Guard Breaker. And now I feel like I'm in a spot where it's kind of hard to ask for more. If I have to roll, I have to roll until I hit Jax and Gragas too, but it's only 2 pairs. If I pick up something else, that means I'm going to be holding a ton of units on my bench, and I might be even playing around 4 costs that are also going to be 1-star. So my goal here is the same thing at 3-2, which is play a strong enough board to preserve HP while also trying to figure out how to get to level 8 and beyond. So these next couple fights that I'm going to be going through, you'll see that people have stronger boards, but they're going to fast 8, they're rolling. I'm going up against Ezreal Chosen and an early Alawi, but I'm still being very competitive and losing only by a few units. And that's okay because my goal is to get to level 8 as healthy as possible. On Carousel, I have no open components, so I'm probably looking for something that synergizes with the AP, like a Rod. I can also take this bow if I really want to as well, so I can go for something like Giant Slayer. I get really fortunate here. I hit Gragas 2 and Jax 2, so now my spot has improved dramatically. I position kind of weird. I have this Jax trapped in the corner. You might be thinking this is a mistake because I'm losing unified value as well as making a melee unit not be able to move, but I was told that trapping Jax in the corner with EDM might be good because if you sample Lux, Jax will become Lux and shoot a beam in the top left corner as well. So pay attention and observe. I'm actually giggling because I'm not entirely sure how good it is, because every 9 seconds or so Jax ends up casting and it ends up dealing a pretty decent amount of damage. And apparently when you check the damage charts, Jax ends up dealing almost 1900 damage, which is, as you might see later in the video, better than how he would do when he's not locked into the corner. So that's something that was quite funny for me to discover, that sometimes Jax situationally can be trapped in the corner if you want to get a little bit more DPS and you don't need that extra front line. However, I want to see what it was like with or without it. However, don't get baited into focusing on that too much, because while it might be fun, sometimes it might grief your fights. I switched sides to see what Jax is going to do when he's not in the corner, although I kind of forget that MF is not getting unified value. And I'm going up against Senna 3, level 7, who have healing orbs and cybernetic, and my comp is able to get that win. So my comp is very strong right now, which means that I'm winning these fights on level 8. I don't have to go to level 9 immediately, but I'm also not going to sell things like this Lux pair because I know that other people are rerolling 3 cost. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to go for Lux 3 as well. And so this is a spot where you have to evaluate very carefully if you can go to level 9, because this is a spot where you have to evaluate very carefully if you can get to 9. Just because you won 3 out of 5 fights on level 4 doesn't mean that you're clear to go to 9, because a lot of people could be saving gold. In these kinds of spots, I have to hold out for the possibility that I might have to roll for a different out. I get a tome and I have a lot of traits in. Remember, tome scales off the number of traits that are on the side of your board. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 traits. So I'll get 3 that are tailored to my board. The tailored traits are Jazz, Big Shot, and Disco. Oh, and Bruiser as well, which is my random, but I random a Bruiser, which is pretty good. It's really interesting if you think about Jazz Emblem, because I have the ability to play into like a level 9 and flex around my Jazz. The only thing is that Jazz also tends to want to play around Misfortune and Lucian, who are AD champions, and I have Shojin and Guardbreaker, which is more AP. A little bit complicated to figure out how to squeeze that into a Jazz board when you don't have a lot of AD items. Big Shot, same exact reason. I don't have that, but Guardbreaker Shojin could theoretically work on like Ezreal, for example. And honestly, the more I think about it, my items are actually not that bad for AD. It's just that I have a Spark already committed, so it feels like I want to lean more into AP. So I'm thinking about Disco or Bruiser Emblem. Bruiser Emblem doesn't benefit me immediately because I already have 2 Bruiser in, and the most important effect of Bruiser is 2, because you get the team HP buff. Going from 2 to 3 doesn't actually do much. So Disco is actually something I'm thinking about, because I can actually, 1, tech into Disco with a Dazzler on Twisted Fate, and 2, my items are actually really good for Twisted Fate. So maybe I have an opportunity to lean into Twisted Fate carry. And I get really lucky and I hit Twisted Fate immediately, so I can get chosen Disco. And now I get 5 Disco, I believe, if I tech in this Nami, which already gives me the Disco setup, and I get multiple Disco balls. Although I get a little bit dizzy here trying to focus on positioning. I didn't actually get it in time. Uh-oh, that's a little bit of a mistake. So I don't get the 5 Disco in, which is a mistake, but hey, at least I got the Twisted Fate chosen. I'm looking at my items, and I think Rage Blade is probably the one that makes the most sense, because I'm trying to have Twisted Fate be a solo carry right now. I could go for Gunblade, but my front line is actually not that tanky. I don't really like Gunblade in this spot nearly as much, so I go for Rage Blade because Twisted Fate scales off of attack speed. And it's not like Rage Blade is the best item on Twisted Fate, but it's very solid because of the way it ramps up the number of cards he throws. All right, so from here, I've gotten all clearance to go to level 9. I hit that Twisted Fate, and I recognize that the out that I played for came really early. And listen, sometimes you're gonna high roll. You have to capitalize on them as much as you can. I choose to sample Zac in the meantime, because Zac, if you sample, gives everybody the ability to bounce, and that adds crowd control and stun, which feeds into the fact of 2 things. 1, I'm trying to get to Ascension. 2, I'm trying to ramp up with Rage Blade on my Twisted Fate. So this is a really efficient board that I'm playing. 5 Disco, 4 Dazzler, 3 Bruiser, and I'm gonna get to level 9. I'm going up against some boards that are decently strong. This is a Kale 2 chosen as well as a Viego, but it doesn't really matter because Twisted Fate Disco is very solid, and my front line is holding out just long enough for my Twisted Fate to ramp up. On Carousel here, you can argue to take another defensive item or another offensive item. I think in this case, I only get offensive items, so I go for a dual gauntlet, trying to see if I can go for a little bit more extra burst. Blue buff is also something I could have taken because maybe I want to take in Lulu in the late game. I have the option of leveling to 9 or to stay at 8 and greed a little bit more econ here, but I choose to go level 9 because I have a unit to play. This is the most important thing about going to level 9 right now. Level 9 is not the end destination any longer in TFT. And so if you go to level 9, you have to remember that if you're in a high roll position like I am, you have to plan for level 10. In this spot specifically, because I have a Blitzcrank to go from 5 to 6 Disco, it's a good level. Also because I have a streak going on with 5 wins, meaning that I can recover recover my economy. This fight is really close, and thanks to that Lux and that level 9, I'm able to get that win. So that was clearly a level 9 difference. And now I can start thinking about, do I want to go to level 10? Level 9 is a new level 8. And level 10 is a new level 9. No matter what, I'm not rolling here because I want to recover my economy. I just spent a lot of my gold to go to 9. And so I want the option of being able to either roll at 9 or to potentially look at 10. If I end up rolling to 10 here, sure, I might hit a Blitzcrank too. But in reality, I want to just get to that 50 as quick as possible to open up my options. Looks like the Punk board has completely fallen off. The Pantheon 3 and Twitch 3 are just not fast enough to keep up with my front line. And Twisted Fate is scaling too fast. One thing that's particularly difficult that I've encountered, by the way, is disco with the unified value is very hard to get. You might notice things like I have this Jax in the front row outside of the disco, and I have this Nami in the second row with unified. I don't think that silver augments are worth super greeting for. I think in hindsight, this was a mistake. I think with the amount of healing and attack speed I left on the table, I ended up making my board weaker. So I think instead, I need to prioritize who are the units that are worth having unified resistance value. Does it really even matter if Nami 1 gets unified? No, but does it matter if Blitzcrank is getting disco and unified? Potentially. So these are the things that you have to be thinking about. Since I have Blitzcrank 2, I want to have items for Blitzcrank 2. Crown Guard is a really good item for Blitzcrank in general because he scales off of ability power to make his shielding and defensiveness a lot better. And also that shield is really good with the Sentinel trait if I'm able to get it in later on. There's an argument that I want to remove these items on set and put them onto Blitzcrank 2. I think that's another optimization I could have done. Have Redemption and Steadfast Heart onto a Blitzcrank. 3-item Blitzcrank 2 is very, very strong and possibly a mistake here of what cost me the ability to preserve more HP. I don't know if I'm going to win that fight if I get the 3 items on Blitzcrank, but I know that my board is weaker. I hit a Sentinel. It's time to take out the Bruisers, and I can now save my remover and play for another Sentinel and get that team-wide resistance buff. I think about who I want to hold Ionic Spark, and I realized one thing, which is Ionic Spark only does things if the unit's alive. Whoa, amazing analysis. So because I need my Ionic Spark to stay alive, I had to put it on my tankiest unit. So in this case, I'm putting it on my Blitzcrank and putting the Redemption next to the Blitzcrank because if I'm able to get that healing and that damage reduction via the aura, that can also be effective as well. That being said, my board is starting to fall off. I've lost 2 fights very convincingly, and now I have to evaluate if I want to go to level 10 or if I want to roll at level 9. So now we're in the final 3, and this is a tough spot of whether or not I want to go to level 10. The question is, if I go to level 10, do I have a good unit to play? If you look at my board, is there anything meaningful on my bench that I could play? I could think about Dazzler, but that'd be a 5th Dazzler and not something particularly good. I can roll 1 time for Legendary and maybe hit something like a Yorick and a Lowy or something else that's generically good, maybe even a Sona. But I could also just level and play this Lulu and immediately give myself a Spellweaver buff plus Hyper Pop, which is actually really good because I have Twisted Fate that scales off of the attack speed for Hyper Pop, and Spellweaver gives your whole team ability power, which is exactly the form of damage I'm doing. And so this is a spot where if I roll at 8, the only thing I could roll for to upgrade is my Zac 2. I do want to keep my Disco together because it's really powerful for my synergies, plus I hit that tome. And I would have to basically hit an entire 2-star unit to replace a unit like Jax, which is the only flexible unit that I have that's not important. Everybody else ties in potentially really important synergies or has a crucial function for my team. And so at this moment, I decide I think I have to go for level 10. I take out my Jax and I play Lulu because I recognize that's inherently a better synergy. And I'm still playing around Unified for some reason. Don't do this. This is not what you want to be thinking about. I go up against the Ghost board, ends up being a weaker version of what I'm going up against. It's the Disco Mirror. Twisted Fate's going to be one of the S tier comps that I'll cover on my launch day video. And I get a nice clean win here. I'm looking for anything that gives me more damage because I have a lot of frontline items already, and Disco gives me a lot of healing. This is also a Ziggs pair. As much as I love having Ionic Spark on Blitzcrank, the reality is if Blitzcrank dies, I have no magic resistance shred, and he is one of the first units to potentially die in these late game scenarios. So I think it's worth going for a Ziggs 2 and giving him a Shiv so that way I have redundancy of my shred in case something goes wrong. Rage Blade has a lot of synergy inherently with Shiv, and I can go for Shojin and Guardbreaker onto my Ziggs. This is just a more balanced set of items. You could argue that I could go for Rageblade, Shiv, and Shojin for max cast, but then Ziggs won't be casting that often. The way I view it is Rageblade ramps the attack speed, which is almost like Twisted Fate gets to cast again, and Ziggs gets Shojin, which is also mana, so I have my mana items separated instead of having them double up. I'm a little bit scared because I feel like at this point, maybe I just die and go third, but I'm committed to hitting Ziggs 2. And if I can hit Ziggs 2, I'm pretty sure this game is going to be a wrap. I hit Alawi, so Alawi is really strong to stall because these tentacles will absorb a lot of damage. Also, important to note, these tentacles count for unified. So now I'm starting to like move things back and forth to see if I can get max unified value. Again, I don't think this was optimal. So I realized at one point, I'm just going to leave the unified value to the units that actually matter and get disco value instead. I hit a Sona pair, but it's a little bit expensive. I have to sell my Twisted Fate pair to hold it. And now my board is online and cooking. I have enough stall. My Twisted Fate can ramp. This is a really tough spot as well, where I choose to lock this Alawi because I realized that my board is struggling on stage 6. If you look, I won only 2 fights and they were very close fights, meaning that as much as 6 disco is fun and all, I think in late game situations, it's just a little bit too much to expect the 6 disco to solo carry me. And so having a chosen Alawi finds a way to uncap my board and go even higher in terms of the ceiling of my potential. So I can sell things like this Twisted Fate, roll for another Twisted Fate 2, and go for an Alawi, and instead play around for Bruiser, make the Alawi an unkillable force in the front line with 5 disco instead of 6, because I still get the double disco ball. And if I can still find a way to get Ziggs 2 and Twisted Fate 2, that ramping through the Ascension in that Blistering Strikes, as well as the Rage Blade, is going to pay off. And so it all ties together. That early game augment pick is what I'm continuing to play around the late game situation, because once more, I find a way to cap my board higher by selling my chosen and instead playing around something that's even stronger. I find that Twisted Fate 2 that I was looking for, I hit a Ziggs. This is pretty fortunate to hit in only like 20 gold or so, but again, you're playing towards your outs. You can't really win a game of TFT without getting lucky. That's just how it works. And I'm thinking about moving these items to Alawi instead, because in reality, Alawi is the important unit and you want to get items on your chosen. Remember, play around your chosen if you can. I'm a little stressed because I really want to win. This is one fight lost into death. We're at stage 7, but this is a really promising situation. I think this Alawi is unkillable. I probably once again should have moved one of these units, maybe like Blitzcrank into the back for disco, but it doesn't really matter. I think my front line is a little bit too strong, and I realized that I greeted unit value again when it didn't really matter, and I could even do things like sacrifice this Nami to potentially get some unified. I tech in Sona because I don't think the Hyper Pop 2 really matters in Sona 1 versus Sona 2. I think healing and shielding makes the most sense because, again, I play Ascension, I'm playing a ramp comp, I stall out and get really strong. And now we're going against the Mirror, something I anticipate to happen a lot. Going against Yorick 2, Blitzcrank 2, Twisted Fate 2, but that's not going to be that big of a deal because I think my comp has hit critical mass, and I found a way to stabilize and go to level 10 and cap out high while being able to sell my 4-cost chosen. And there you go, just like that, it was a first where I was flexing a lot of my game plan into a S tier comp and able to get it up. So there you have it. I hope that this helps you understand how to evaluate the power of your headliners simply by using the formula and whether or not it makes sense for your board with your items and your augment. While I did get fortunate where I didn't have to roll very much, the same thing is going to be replicated whether or not you roll once, 3 times, 5 times, or even more. The difference is whether or not you're able to save gold and go for a higher level and capitalize and end in the first place. But this should help you understand how to get those top 4s in no time. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.